I would like to extend a very warm welcome to Professor Marian Jones. Um, she is Professor Emeritus in International Enterprise and Business at the University of Sheffield. But most importantly, she is the very first female recipient of the John Dunning Lifetime Achievement Awards within the AIB UK and Ireland chapter community. Marian, very warm welcome. Could you please tell us something about your career trajectory? When did you start your academic career?
Well, it was not a conventional trajectory by any manner of means. I didn't go to university when I left school. In fact, I never did an undergraduate degree. I went to live in Zimbabwe for a while when I was in my mid-20s, and quite by accident got a job as a lecturer in a technical college there, Kwekwe Technical College. I'd been interviewed for a part-time post teaching in the evening, and I thought, well, I've only got an HND, but I could give that a go. And it's only evening school, and see if I make a mess of it, that will be the end of it. And what happened was 18 months went by, never heard anything. And then the principal of the college where I had been interviewed contacted me and said, do you want that job? We're expecting you to start at the start of term and we haven't seen you. And it turned right in typical Zimbabwe style that they had told head office, they'd told the further education sector, they told the principal, they told all my colleagues that I'd be joining them, but they forgot to write to me. So I said, okay, I could come along. So I went there, and I just want to give a call out to where my inspiration come from. It was a lecturer who started at the same time of me. His name was Abraham Mashumba. I don't know if you'll ever hear this from Zimbabwe, but he was the most inspiring teacher I think I ever met and encouraged me wholeheartedly. He taught quantitative methods in economics and used to walk into the classroom with a piece of chalk, whereas I went in with a pile of books that stretched from my arms to under my chin for security. So I just thought I'd tell you that one because people start their careers in very different ways, and that was mine. So anyway, eventually I came back to the UK and did my PhD part-time at the University of Strathclyde with Stephen Young, the late Stephen Young, who was my supervisor and became a lifelong friend and was always my mentor, and was lecturing at the same time as I did my PhD at Strathclyde. Then moved after 14 years to the University of Glasgow, spent 11 years there, and then went to the University of Sheffield. So I have experience in 3 universities plus a college, and they were very different in each one. I loved each one for different reasons, and moved on for me when the time was right. So there you are.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing. So when you started out, what was the gender ratio in academia and how did you feel as a female academic?
Well, let me start with when I started at the University of Strathclyde, which was 1990, on staff doing my PhD part-time. I think it was about 20% female academics, possibly less than that. I'm not absolutely sure because there were a lot of women around, but most of them were in administrative or secretarial roles at the time. And there wasn't a lot of distinction. There was more of a gender distinction than a role distinction made. So it was very much male and women at that time. How did it feel? Quite intimidating, being a woman, but also not having had by that time I had qualifications, but I'd never done a full degree. So the university experience was new to me. So it was quite daunting. I spent a lot of time, I mean, every spare minute I spent studying, trying to make sure that I knew my topic area, that I understood what was going on and so on. I loved it. I joined everything that was possible to join, so every presentation I was there, every visiting speaker I was there, every opportunity to go to another university I would go, shaking at the knees, but I went just the same because curiosity is a wonderful thing. It gets over an awful lot of a lot of fear for most people. So that would be a tip. If you're curious, follow your curiosity.
That's an amazing advice.
I have to say that in the early days, you know, we talk about the gender divide, the male and female gender divide. I got a lot of support from male colleagues, always did. Not all of them, but the ones that did support me were absolutely fantastic. Equally, there were women that, you know, wanted to keep other women in their place, and that could be very difficult as well. So the gender balance is a very complicated thing, as everybody knows. It's not black and white, it's not male female. Nowadays there is so much in terms of diversity, about gender diversity, and what do you call it, when you identification is what I'm thinking of, when you identify as different genders. So it's much more complicated now than men and women, but I think the experiences we go through are fairly similar, in the sense that if you're part of a minority, it can be very difficult to join and be part of what essentially is seen as the mainstream at the time.
Could you tell us about your experiences, and were there some key experiences that stuck with you?
Key experiences that stuck with me. Oh my goodness. I think as a PhD student / junior member of staff, one of the experiences that I've looked back on, which I think is interesting for people, is that Steve Young, my supervisor, saw me as somebody that had a bit of potential, and he used to delegate a lot of tasks to me, which you might see as him dumping his work on me. But actually what he was giving me was, and he was very honest about it, he told the editors of journals, but he would ask me to review journal articles for him that he didn't have time to do. And he would write to the editor and said, my doctoral student will do this. And they were way above my level of comprehension at the time. But because I'd been asked to do it, and, you know, I would, you know, put my heart and soul into it and read enormously around the reviews and try and give the reviews that I would like to receive myself. This was even before I started publishing. And he did that with a lot of things, administrative tasks. He and Peter Buckley and others got me involved in the Academy of International Business UK, and it's now UK and Ireland. It was UK at the time. And give me a role on that. And these things, I think, were the things that really actually gave me a really strong foundation for the career that subsequently developed. And I think it's important to note that while these things are happening, I wasn't really aware of that myself. You know, I didn't think, oh, this is important for my career development. These were part of the job that I was doing and part of everyday life. So from that point of view, I felt very included, and perhaps given the supervisor I had, you know, was quite privileged in the sense that he had the foresight to see how important these kind of tasks and roles were for me. So I'm very grateful for that.
So how did this shape your own mentoring practice?
I think it's, yeah, he never gave me really bad articles to review. They were always good ones. I didn't think of that at the time, but looking back on it, I think it helped me to be very discerning about what is good, what the principles of good research are, what the ethical principles are in terms of doing research. Also, I think it was quite wonderful to see work in progress, you know, so even the best scholars and researchers don't necessarily write perfect work on the first draft or even the 10th draft. So, you know, being part of that process and being able to make a, you know, even an anonymous contribution to that was very important. And it helped me craft my own work and, you know, try and aspire to those kind of standards too.
Thank you. You were also instrumental. You set up the doctoral colloquium at the UK and Ireland chapter. Is that correct?
Yes. Yes, with Jeremy Clegg. We did it together the first year, I think, and then Jeremy quite quickly went on my memory might be a bit shaky here, but he quite quickly went on to be the chair of the committee, or something like that. So yes, I did it myself. That became so important to me. It also enabled me to become the director of the doctoral program at Strathclyde quite quickly after that, and in fact before I finished my own PhD. And it for various reasons, and one was because not all academic institutions in the country at that time were offering research training methods. In fact, mine didn't, and nor did they. I was in a university which essentially had a faculty of business studies. So the theoretical side of it was not the same as Glasgow University, for example, where a lot of the staff and students actually were studying classics. So, had a very deep theoretical education. So I was aware that a lot of people coming to the conference, or a lot of the people that we wanted to come to the conference and bring into IB, didn't have such a strong background. And therefore, one of the functions of the doctoral colloquium was to give people an insight, even if it was just for the day at the conference, into what could be, what other knowledge there was, and how they could get it. And therefore, I would put together the panels. In those days, we had 3 students on a panel of 3, feedback from three academics, often quite senior academics, people like Alan Rugman. John Dunning himself participated once, Mike Wright, Peter Buckley, Stephen Young himself, all of these people that I were way out of my league, but I approached them and they were so happy to come along and help and give their wisdom to these students. And having 3 different views, I choose the panelists quite carefully so that there was a balanced view, sometimes opposing views that the students would be exposed to, which I thought was very important. And the other thing was, and I won't name any names here, there was a culture at that time to severely criticize doctoral students, or any students for that matter, any level, for not getting their work right, or not doing it properly, or not referencing properly and things like that. And it could be not only soul destroying, but quite humiliating for the student. And I certainly felt that when I had to present in front of, I was a lecturer, so you can understand how I felt being asked to present my progressing PhD thesis to a very large group of both staff and students, and being ripped apart by one of them publicly. It was so humiliating, and I thought that's never going to happen on the AIB UKI doctoral thing. So I did impress upon people that yes, we want criticism, but we want positive, constructive criticism that's going to help that person progress. If the work's wrong, say it, but don't destroy the person at the same time. And that culture has retained. I wasn't the only person that thought that, but I was in a position to be able to impress upon people the importance of it. So if I have anything to be proud of, I think that's one of the things that remains something that was really important, and I think it helped a lot of people to advance there. The other part of why we're on the AIB is that the doctoral program has never been elitist, in the sense that we have never, and this is beyond the time I stopped doing it, which is quite a number of years ago. Yes, we want the best people, we want them to be there, but we don't exclude people who are not the best. So there's a range of people of capabilities, different stages in their PhD. We also have the stream for very early stage doctoral students, to which I don't know whether it still happens now, but we used to invite promising master's students who we thought might, enter a PhD program, and get them to write a proposal and come and present that as well. And that's always been very well received, and has not only helped recruitment into AIB membership, but has helped recruitment into the doctoral programs, and in fact the staff of various universities around the country. So it's so important, and it's just fantastic to see it continuing and so successfully. So yeah, well done everybody.
Well, I need to thank you personally because I myself benefited a lot through this. We also had, I was very fortunate because I also met Stephen Young and I met
Uh-huh,
yourself a
uh-huh.
few years back, and I received a lot of very good feedback.
Good. I'm glad to hear it.
So, if you think back across your entire career,
Mm.
what are the challenges that were there at the beginning and that are still there?
Yeah. Well, for a woman, I think there's imposter syndrome that affects us all, and we all know what that is. And if I was to look back, I don't know how I would change that because, you know, I'm doing different things now, and I still feel like an imposter. But there you go. That's it. Um, I think some of the challenges that still remain is, although that we still have in some institutions a much better gender split or a much better diverse group acknowledging everybody, there still remains preconceptions. In fact, at this year's WAIB, I did meet one young woman from an institution not in this country but an advanced country, who was in an institution where the gender balance was still very much, you know, 75-80% male and the rest female, and was experiencing exactly the same problems of just recognition, acknowledgement, and acceptance into essentially what was a male club at that institution. And I think that does remain, and even remains in UK and Ireland AIB, I'm sorry to say, in a small extent, and sometimes to so subtly that people don't realize, you know. So I'm not trying to blame anyone here, but at a conference I was at 2 or 3 years ago, and I think you were there as well, Nomi. I was sitting in the audience and looking around and thinking, my, this is wonderful. There are, you know, at least 50% women in this room. But the panel, there were 6 or 7 people on the panel. There was only one woman on the panel. The conversation about the important things in AIB that transpired after this panel, it was a plenary panel, you know, the important one. Most of the conversation was baton passing from one man to another, you know, Bill, what do you think? John, what do you think? George, what do you think? And so on and so forth. And all of the women in the audience sat there very quiet. And yet I know some of these women, and they are very mouthy individuals. Yeah, but for some reason, just the atmosphere wasn't right. And eventually the conversation went on to talk about responsibility for morality in international business and responsibility and so on. And I raised my hand and made the comment that as academics, we are teaching international business. And if we're not teaching ethics and morality, then we're not doing our job properly, and we should discuss this. And the room went silent for quite a long time. And the chair of the panel eventually said, what do you think about that? And pointed to one of the men who'd been answering before. And then the baton passing started again. And I'm sorry to say that women either didn't speak up, felt they didn't have the opportunity to, or perhaps were thinking, this just isn't right, and I'm not going to say something. So I did talk about it afterwards. So advice I would give, you know, to those of us who are from minority groups, shall we say, even if it's statistically a majority, is that, you know, think about what you're going to say, whether it's appropriate, but say it. And, you know, come back, join the conversation, interrupt, put your hand up, stand up, wave if necessary, but don't sit there quietly, you know, feeling uncomfortable, especially when it's something very important like, you know, the ethics of international business, especially if you consider, you know, the state of the world at the moment. Have your voice heard.
That's very good advice. Do you have any other pieces of advice for our early and mid-career researchers?
um, Early and mid-career, I think be aware of your own work and what kind of contribution you're making. Contribution, as all your supervisors and everything will say to you, or reviewers if you're past your PhD and writing papers. Know what your contribution is, know where it fits, and know whether it's important. and trust in your instinct on that, okay? And keep that in mind through the submission and writing process. I think one of the big challenge for all academics now is the pressure to publish. And there are easy, quick ways to publish, and there are slow ways to publish. And the pressure in your institution or financially, if you've got family, for example, and need to try and move up quickly if you can, try and follow a legitimate, appropriate way of publishing. Retain your integrity and you know, self-respect as an author. Don't join syndicates that will give you cheap, fast publications. It, in the long run, it doesn't work. It doesn't pay off. And you know, being the 10th author or even the 4th author on a paper where your role is quite marginal, or it's the same role in every paper you write, you know, so if you get 20, 30 papers where your role has been to run a, you know, a automated least mean squares routine or something, doesn't make you a fantastic academic. It makes you fantastic at that particular technique. So in the long term, you need to develop yourself, develop your skills, make sure you write your own papers as well as co-writing with other people. Choose your co-authors with care. I'm lucky, I've had really wonderful co-authors, but my publication record is not as extensive as it might be, you know. We can't do everything in our career, so that's a regret I have, but my co-authors have been absolutely fantastic. They've been a pleasure to work with, and I've learned so much from them. Okay. A few in particular, if anybody knows my publications, they'll know who they are. But I'd like to make a special call out to Nicole Coviello, who is fantastic. We've published a few papers together. Ben Oviat, who I didn't write with, but who actually invited me to various events and things and encouraged my work and gave me reviews on it. It was absolutely brilliant. Becky Ruber, who is a long-term friend and mentor. We haven't written. I'm not quite sure why, but Becky's been fantastic. And Patricia McDougall, who of course is the mother of the international entrepreneurship field and has brought so many of us on. So these are my main co-authors. I only ever wrote once with Steve Young. I think he wanted me to write my own stuff, so I did. It's a bit of a regret, but I think I developed more not writing with him. And my doctoral students, who I've learned so much from. I haven't written with all of them. A lot of them, again, would be better to do their own writing. But supervising doctoral students is probably the most important part of my career. It's just been a pleasure. So thank you to everybody that has been my supervisor. Whether you like it or not, I did. And I hope I didn't give you too hard a time.
I am sure they only have wonderful things to say about it.
Well, one would hope.
So if you could go back in time, what advice would you give your younger self?
What advice should I get? It's very difficult. I think find out more about the department and university that I was working with at the time. Ask more questions of more people. Try to understand the pressures that university departments are under, within the restraints of which we all work under. You know, I think most of us understand those things much later in our careers, where we're given more responsible rules and so on. The advice I'd give myself was advice that I was given by a previous head of division. And as most people will really understand this, it was the workload model time, where you are told you will teach this, that, and the other, and mark this, that, and the other, and have these administrative tasks to do. And in the olden days, you were lucky if you had a ahead of your section or something that gave you what really suited you and what would help with your career. So this institution I was working in, it was a case of just fit people into slots. And I was really unhappy about it. And, for the first couple of years, I complained and complained and complained. And then the third year I went along and complained again. And the head of division sat back and folded his arms and said, Marian, if you could come with me for a solution, I would do anything you wanted, because I have problems doing this. And it was such a wonderful piece of advice, because I thought, actually, that's true. I've just been complaining about things and I could quite easily solve this problem. So I went away and had a look at the workload model. I understood the subject area where I was and looked at it and asked the people where we were co-teaching and said, what if we swapped? What if we did this? Would this work better for the group? And went back to him and suggested the solution. And he was delighted and I got what I wanted. The other person who actually gave me that same advice by demonstration was a colleague of mine called Anna Morgan Thomas, who you will know, who is very forthright and very outspoken. And she always got what she wanted, not out of any nastiness or anything, but she did exactly that. She worked out what the problem was and went along with the solution and said, here's your solution, do this. So that would be my advice. Think about the challenges that the people around you are facing, that the people more senior are facing, and think about that, see if there's any way that you can solve that problem. Think about everybody else in the plan as well, of course, don't trample on other people in the process. So, so someone else who is very, very good at that, who's organized the recent conference, is Margaret Fletcher. She's also another very forthright woman who works out what needs to be done and gets on with it. So that would be my advice. I wish I'd known that many, many years ago.
Thank you very much. This is indeed fantastic advice.
Uh-huh.
So are there any things that you would do differently now?
Any things I would do differently? Probably hundreds of them. That question has really put me on the spot. Yes, I think so. I think I would try to have, but this goes back to what I was saying about, try and find out more about the bigger picture, about what's happening and where you can fit. There are a lot of projects and things that I started with enthusiasm and excitement and, really wanting to take them forward. And in the end, sometimes my fault, sometimes not my fault. I got sidetracked and they didn't happen, or it might not have been possible to happen. And, if I'd known a bit more about what I was trying to do, I might have stopped pursuing them before wasting time. But none of them in themselves were a waste of time, in the sense that I learned a lot about it and did work with people alongside. So I spent quite a lot of time pursuing various projects in the United Nations in both UNCTAD and UNIDO, largely at by the encouragement of Stephen Young, because he worked a lot with them for many, many years. But by that time, he was later in his career and I didn't have the internal contacts to make it possible. So while I was involved with a few really, really interesting projects that were very worthwhile, I never managed to achieve what I was trying to, and that was to get the two institutions that I was working with involved with the UN. UNIDO was particularly keen to make a connection with universities that I was working with, but the universities at the time were not prepared or not ready to reciprocate. So what would be my advice for that? There are some things as an individual you can't do. You need a group, you need a team. Sometimes it takes many, many, many years, more than what we have in our career, to achieve things. So if you can find the people that do have the inroads, work with them. If you can't, then, enjoy the experience, but progress with what you're doing that is working. So there you go.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Is there anything else that you would like to tell us, as a closing remark?
As a closing remark, I think the closing remark is that, well, we were just at the conference recently where some of my colleagues were talking about the most important things for IB going forward. And well, we only had an hour and a half or something. And, you know, there are so many changes happening in the world at the moment, and international business is, in my view, going to fundamentally change because of shifts in national political allegiances, changes that are affecting supply chains, changes that are affecting where FDI is going to be, changes even in the nationalities of people and our security and integrity. All of these things impact on international business, and I think we're really going to have to start running hard to keep abreast of these changes and work out how, in fact, theoretically they fit with the subject area. And because I'm a small firm theorist and researcher, one of the things that I think is incredibly important, and this stems beyond small firms to countries, etc., is to look at power relationships and whether, in fact, unfettered power and unfettered capitalism has gone further than we can really theorize about adequately or control, either in a business context or in national and international context. So I would say look at power and look at agency. What I mean by agency is not just representation, which is the way we look at it in international business, but agency in the deeper social science level, that agency is about the ability and the right to make a choice, and how much that is perhaps being stripped away from the weaker members of our society and the smaller businesses as well. So that would be it. And just thank you to everybody. I have had an absolute fantastic time in my career, and it's been so happy to work with you all. Thank you, Noemi.
Thank you so much.